Well, please welcome Julia. Julia Wolfman is, I'm reading all of your titles, Julia.
Oh, I can introduce myself. Don't worry about that.
I'm gonna say my personal part. I saw her keynote address at the Montessori Schools of Massachusetts conference last month, and I was floored. She is a neuroscientist and a Montessorian, so she's gonna give you all the feels. Julia, I'll let you do the rest.
Thank you, Saloni. It's an honor to be here speaking with you. I'm glad I could come and support your conference. It's exciting to hear that you're doing this conference and switching schools. I always love to do that, to see other schools. So welcome everybody, and thanks for having me. So
We
as Saloni, yeah.
are so grateful for you to do this for us.
So as Saloni said, I am a Montessori teacher, and I have my master's, not my doctorate, in neuroscience from Harvard, where I won a Dean's Prize for my research on the movable alphabet. So Harvard was starting to learn about Montessori that some time ago. I won't say how long. And I currently have a lot of jobs. I run Maitri Learning. I'm faculty on the Brain Health Initiative, guest lecturer at Harvard in the Neuroscience Learning course. I'm a researcher through University of Wisconsin La Crosse, and I'm also a teacher mentor. My big job, though, my big work is running Maitri Learning, and you'll find a lot of resources there if you're curious. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about science of reading. And science of reading sometimes is confused with just literacy research, but it's really a much bigger thing. Science of reading is decades of research in the fields of education, literacy, psychology, cognitive science, and neuroscience. So the real science of reading is all of that together, to think about how we can really nurture literacy development in the child. The literacy research kind of tells us what to teach, like what are the big chunks that we want to teach as far as literacy goes. So vocabulary and oral language, phonological awareness, which means hearing the sounds of language, phonics, which means attaching sounds to letters and symbols and using that to encode and decode words, fluency, and comprehension. Those are the big buckets of literacy research. But when we think about neuroscience research, we think about relationships, we think about emotions, that learning is interest-based, that we're thinking about how we're thinking, metacognition, that we have choice and agency. We feel confident that we're capable of doing things, self-efficacy, and that we're hands-on, multisensory, and student-centered learning. So all of these concepts, right, come together for neuroscience of learning, and we have to put them together with the literacy research. So it's not just about phonics, it's about the whole big picture of all of that. Is everybody hearing me okay? Is this making sense so far? I can see a head shaking. I see a hand raised. Is that Saloni?
Yes, thumbs up.
A thumbs up. Okay, great. Okay, so we're going to kind of walk through quickly these 5 buckets of literacy research and talk about how neuroscience supports them and how that fits into what we do in Montessori schools. So we'll start with vocabulary and oral language. And this is normal for the brain. Like all vertebrates, we learn how to speak and hear, right? Barring some neurological differences or some traumatic events, we learn how to speak and hear just by existing. And this is true for humans. We can see we have this little part of the brain for producing words and this other part of the brain for listening to words. And it's almost the same in birds and other vertebrates. They also have these 2 other areas, right? So this is a standard evolutionary thing, verbal communications, normal part of evolution. And we learn to speak. It makes sense then that it's just through relationships that we learn our language, that we learn it. No matter how many languages we're learning, we can learn several at the same time. We'll learn it based on where we are, not based on where we were born. And it's about engaging in conversation. I love this picture of I was in a rock band. This was the drummer in my rock band. This is George with his baby, right? And you can see his little guy is making this face at him, and George is like making the same face back at Ryan, right, as his son. And that's a conversation with infants, that serve and return, that back and forth that we have, even starting at that age when it's just babbling and woo woo sounds that we're repeating or that they're repeating. And taking turns, having turns in our conversation. So it's not just about us talking all the time, but it's also about them having a chance to talk and express themselves. That's really important for vocabulary and oral language development. Now, vocabulary and develops based on exposure. So if we're using a lot of good, rich language with our children, they tend to have this blue line of much higher vocabulary development. If we're not using a lot of language, like we're really stressed out and we're just like turn on the screen, like we can't handle it, they're getting a lot less down here of that vocabulary development. The thing is, this famous research by Hart and Risley, you've probably seen it before, it really influences the trajectory of each human's life. So you kind of keep going on that trajectory of how much language you're getting exposed to, right? So that's why it's so important in Montessori. We're like, use big words, right? Say it's articulate, it's a obtuse, angled, and really use the big language with the kids. It's helpful for them in their long term. But it's not just about giving them the words, it's also about them taking turns. And this research showed that these parts of the brain are really getting reinforced and activated when the students are engaging in conversation. So it's not one-sided. It really has to be balanced if we want those neural networks to get stronger. Because I can't give you the whole neuroscience of learning talk, but every time we do something repeatedly, the brain gets more efficient at it. So we want to be doing things repeatedly if we want to develop efficiency in the brain. Okay, so giving kids turns to talk. Now, this is really interesting because our conversational turns need to be at the level that the child is capable of, because different parts of the brain develop at different times, right? It doesn't just boom, all of a sudden develop at once. We've got this Wernicke's area, right, which develops first, just further in the back of the brain at the arcuate fasciculus. That's your big word for the day, arcuate fasciculus. It's these neuronal connections, these big axonal connections between these two parts of the brain. This part of the brain, Wernicke's area, is about learning to what words mean, linking words to meaning. And later we developed Broca's area, which is about producing speech and grammar. And it's not like, boom, it's developed, but it develops over time. And this is why with little kids especially, we want to ask them to show us rather than to tell us, because it's hard for them to express themselves verbally. And that can lead to tantrums. Now, I know none of the students in your schools ever have tantrums. You all have perfect children and they're always well behaved and they never get upset or frustrated. Sometimes when we're asking children, what is this? What is this? What is this? They get really frustrated. And it's just because that Broca's area hasn't developed fully yet and they're not able to express as well as they can receive. So this is just like the 3-period lesson, right? Recognition, the second period, develops before the ability to express what you've learned the third period. Okay. All right. So this is where we come into the idea of executive functions, right? So we've got this milestones of language development going along the talk, like how many words can you say, right? And then we've got these executive function things going across the bottom. Like, can you hold your mind and information in your mind over a short delay? Right? Like we think about those, 2-step verification codes, right? Like, oh, I got to remember 4, 3, 6, 5, 8, right? Can you hold it and work with that information? Can you then update the information or manipulate the information? That happens a little later, about 18 months, 20 months. And then can you inhibit an automatic response, right? So like not just pushing another kid, right? And that inhibitory control, or for us, not just like yelling at someone who's a jerk. Right? So that inhibitory control is executive function. It develops a little later. Okay. But what we've learned is that these are really intertwined. So executive functions and vocabulary and oral language development happen together. And there's a lot of research that shows that your level of vocabulary really influences your level of executive function development. There's some research that shows that it's the executive function development that influences your vocabulary development. That's why I have the dotted arrow on the bottom. But more research, pretty convincing, is showing that just by having good vocabulary, having good language skills, we're helping with executive function. And that makes sense when you think about it, because if we're asking kids to do things, right, and they're like, I don't know what you mean, right, it's going to be upsetting and they're not going to have they're going to have a temper tantrum. But if their vocabulary is strong, and they understand what we're asking of them, then they're probably going to have more ability to work with the information. Is this making sense so far? Am I totally overloading you? Are you bored? Is this good? Everybody good? I can't see much. You have to, I see one thumbs up. Okay, thank you. I'm so grateful for the feedback. Okay, so the bottom line when we're thinking about vocabulary and oral language development in the science of reading, SOR stands for science of reading, is we need to help students develop the vocabulary and oral language via relationships and their interests. And we want to organically introduce executive function training. Now, I've been speaking about early childhood, but this doesn't stop at early childhood. And there's actually research that shows that even in middle school, it's this vocabulary level and this need to support vocabulary development that really influences literacy, these endpoints, fluency, and comprehension. So vocabulary isn't something that we're ever done with. It keeps going throughout our lives. And this, we all know this, right? Because we learn some new subject, like today you learned arcuate fasciculus, if you didn't already know it, that you know there's axonal tracts between Broca's and Wernicke's. That you're learning vocabulary, we're learning vocabulary all the time. Like even if you just like you read on your Kindle, you read a great new historical novel and you see these great turns of phrase, you know, we're still learning vocabulary and we want to bring that richness of vocabulary to our students. Right. Everybody good so far? You okay with vocabulary? Happy? Okay. Thank you, Saloni. All right. So how do we support this? There's a bazillion things we do. We have conversations and we can have structured, intentional conversations with the children. We can do grace and courtesy type lessons to teach them how to have a conversation. We get conversations with their peers where they're encouraged and allowed to speak with their peers. We regard that as work. We're not like, oh, they're just talking. Let's go get them to pick up some materials. No, we recognize that they're working when they're talking. It's effort for them. We do a lot of grace and courtesy lessons to help them develop skillful relationship interactions, skillful language with other people. We tell true stories about our life, right? Uplifting stories, short stories that help put the world in context for them. We talk about art. I hope you guys have a lot of fine art in your room so that you can have conversations about art. The thing about art is that when we ask others about it, there's really no wrong answer because it's art. So speaking about art, just asking people their opinion. What do you think? What do you like this painting? You know, why? What would it be like to be there, right? Those kind of open-ended questions. It really is powerful because it develops self-efficacy and agency in our students because you can't be wrong. You can't be wrong. You can just speak and you can start to learn how to speak, how to organize your thinking into intelligent sentences. We're speaking about geography too, using our geography folders, geography materials, everything in cultural, right? Having read alouds, playing question games. There's so many ways that we support vocabulary and oral language development. And then of course the materials. So all of that is like hardly any materials. And then you have materials. We have vocabulary cards, we have matching cards, we have sorting cards, right? We play listen and do games. We play spoken classification games like categories, right? All of that kind of work really supports vocabulary and oral language development. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next step. Does anybody have any questions or something they want to add on the super quick high overview of vocabulary and oral language? Good? Okay. All right, so we'll move on to phonological awareness. And feel free to interrupt me if you have something that you want to say. I love to be interrupted. Okay, so phonological awareness refers to the ability to hear and manipulate the sounds and language. Now, I have a little thing about the auditory cortex. So the auditory cortex, these are pictures of the auditory cortex, or auditory is the part of the brain that helps with hearing. And that cortex is just that part of the brain, that outer skin like a grape on the brain. And this is showing you the development of myelin in that one part of the auditory cortex. And this is like at birth, you can see things are looking sparse. And then over here at age 5, you can see things are much thicker and darker. That's because it's being myelinated. And it's our experience hearing in the world that myelinates, that causes that myelin to form. Myelin is that fatty substance around axons that makes, it's almost like insulation, but it's a living cell. And it makes everything move really quickly and efficiently through the brain. And we want myelin, right? We want that to get down there so we can go zippy zippy from all these parts of the brain. It's helpful. But it won't form, like if we grew up without hearing language, that myelin just won't get laid down in the brain. It's experience dependent. And so by our interactions with young children especially, it really influences their myelin development. Now, it doesn't mean we can't do it at later ages. We absolutely can, not as effortlessly as we do when we start with the young ages. So that's just a little bit about myelin and hearing. But I have a little example for you. Does anybody speak Polish or Russian in the room? Raise your hand if you do. Do I see any Polish or Russian? None. Oh, one. Wait, I see one. Okay, so you're on the in. You're on the inside for this. Okay, are you ready? Don't give it away. All right. So I'm going to say maybe later in Polish and in Russian. And I was in Poland last year giving a talk on Montessori. And I learned some Russian when I adopted my son from Kazakhstan, ages ago. And I heard them say this thing, and I'm like, wait a minute, that sounds just like Russian. And it was tricky for me. So I'm going to tell you in Polish, to say maybe later, you say może później, może później, może później. And in Russian, you say może być позже, może być позже. Can you guys hear the difference? Może później, może być позже. It sounds really similar, right? Now, what if I put the words up here? Może później, może być позже. It's a little helpful, isn't it? When you see those letters up there. So this is about phonological awareness, this ability to hear the distinct sounds in language, and then to be able to manipulate them so that you could say it both ways, right? So that's what phonological awareness is really about. And when we're first learning a language, it can be hard. Was it hard? Raise your hand if it was hard for anybody to hear the difference between those two. Did everybody hear the differences clearly? Some people, it was a little hard. And that's normal, because we're just learning. Those sounds are new for us, which is why I'm so glad not many people speak Polish or Russian. That was a good example. Those sounds are new for us. Okay, so again, we're back to this two different parts of the brain developing at different times. So if we're asking them, we want to recognize that students can hear differences, students of all ages, before they can manipulate those differences. Okay, easier to recognize, again, second period, than it is to express it, act upon it, which is third period. Okay, so we need a lot of patience in these learning processes, and it happens at different ages for different things. So it's not always like, okay, well, they're 10, they should be with me. It just doesn't work that way. Different parts of the brain develop at different times. We just need patience, always. Patience. Okay, and this, when you read the words, was it a little easier for you to understand the pronunciation differences? That's typical, because we have children, like when they're really little, you hear them say the word like surprise, right? And they say surprise. But when they start reading and they get a little older, they recognize, oh, there's an R in that word. They change the way they articulate the word. They'll say surprise, surprise. And you can hear that difference. We're so fortunate to be in schools that teach these ranges of ages. You can witness the difference of how we articulate before we can read and after we can read. So learning to read is actually helping with our ability to articulate, with the development of our phonological awareness. So it doesn't just end when we're tracing the sandpaper letters. It doesn't just end once we start reading. We're continually refining and developing that. And that's why articulation in the classroom can be so powerful and effective. So we think about I Spy, or the sound game that we play in primary, but we can also do similar work with older students, because it doesn't just end at primary, right? So we do these things like I Spy something that starts with and ends with. So right away, we're doing two things in this example, okay? Because it's easier developmentally for students to hear initial sounds and ending sounds before they can hear medial sounds. And there's research that shows that. And this is why it's so brilliant. The way we do the sound game is like, how did they know that, right? So brilliant. The first level, we start with just beginning sounds. That's easiest for the brain. The second level, we do beginning and ending sounds at the same time, right? Still easier for the brain, but isolating the difficulty of ending sounds. Third level is beginning sounds, and then ending sounds, and then middle sounds, out of order. So I Spy with my little eye, something that starts with B, ends with K, and has the middle sound So in that order. And then the fourth level, segmenting all the sounds. So why do I give you this example? You're not all primary, right? You're not in with the little kids all the time, because this is relevant for all of us. Having these scaffolds and supports, giving the first sound and the last sound and the middle sound, our goal is to focus the student's attention on whatever it is that we're teaching. And we want scaffolds available to support them so that they can get to what we're teaching. And that has to do with cognitive load. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Okay, so another thing that helps with phonological awareness is music training. Okay, it really helps develop these phonological awareness regions in the brain. And they have this research here that's showing you these students up here, they had musical training and they had so much better ability to hear the sounds and language and more activity in these parts of the brain that are associated with hearing the sounds of the language, the frontal gyrus. But the people who were untrained or who had dyslexia had a much harder time hearing the sounds of language. And this is important because musical training is happening all through our classrooms. We're singing, we're playing the bells, we're playing the tone bars, right? We're doing rhythm games, right? Maybe a little dancing. Super important for phonological awareness and for literacy development, and not just in primary, and definitely supportive for children at risk for reading difficulties. How many of you have a student in your classroom who is either diagnosed with dyslexia or you suspect has dyslexia in your school? I know you're not in one classroom. Everybody? I don't see a single hand going up. Does anybody have a student with dyslexia in their school or at risk, who they think is at risk for dyslexia? Yeah. Okay. So most of us will have them because it's about 10% of the population will have it. So it's probably in your school. So supporting these interventions with music can be incredibly helpful for children who are at risk. Okay, so the bottom line for phonological awareness development, which is particularly important for dyslexia, is that it's experience dependent. We need to practice speaking, practice listening for it to develop. It improves when we start reading, and it can be enhanced by music training. Okay, those are your big points in the science of reading. So how do we do this in the Montessori environment? We're playing I Spy, we're playing tongue twisters. Do you guys do tongue twisters? Red leather, yellow leather, red leather, yellow leather, red leather. You guys can do this in the car line. When you're greeting kids in the car line, do you do that? In the morning, you can just throw out a tongue twister. You have a smile on your face, say, oh, I'm trying to do this tongue twister. And then the parents hear it and the children hear it. And it just gets everybody starting to focus in on articulation. Songs and poems, obviously dancing, rhythm games, Pig Latin. Anybody still speaking Pig Latin? Do you remember this? Are you guys old enough to remember Pig Latin? So you say, ex-nay, I'm-te, il-way, il-way, peak say, bout a, science nay. So like that, remember Pig Latin? Very good. That is the act of manipulating phonemes, phonological awareness. That's, children love to do it because their brain is ripe to do it. And it's fun. So these are great little games that maybe we played when we were kids that we can just play with the children when we're interacting with them throughout the school day. Then, of course, sensory training, sound cylinders, bells, all blindfolded work, anything to help support the development of the auditory cortex. Okay, so any questions on phonological development? Anybody want to add anything? Or tell me I'm bananas? Disagree? No? You guys are just very quiet, happy students. Okay, I'm going to keep going then. Okay, phonics is next. And in alphabetic languages, phonics refers to teaching the relationships between letters and sounds and how to encode, write, and decode read. So encoding and decoding. And of course, in Montessori, we know writing comes before reading. In the rest of the world, they're not getting that yet, but they're starting to catch up. They're starting to catch up because there's more and more research showing that they go hand in hand. You probably have heard this, maybe you've heard this before, that evolution has not prepared us to read, okay? Our brains are not designed for reading letters. Instead, what we have to do is we take this part of the brain that's designed to recognize faces and we transform it, recycle those neurons into ones that can recognize letters and link them to sounds. It's called neuronal recycling, and illiterate adults don't have this part of the brain developed. Like, you just won't see it. It's not active in illiterate adults. That's part of how we know that it works this way. So we have to, by the act of doing this, we're teaching the brain. And to read, we need the whole brain. We need the whole brain. First, we have to see something, or in Braille, we'll touch it. Then we have to recognize it as letter strings that have sounds, right? Then we forge it into our lexicon, right? What does this mean? And then we respond vocally or subvocally. So we need the whole brain to read, which means we need the whole environment, the whole school, because we have to support everything in brain development if we're supporting reading. It's not just about what's on the language shelves. It's about everything rich in the environment. And because writing and reading both develop together, we need experience in both writing and reading. And so in Montessori, we're talking about those sandpaper letters or letter sound charts if the kids are older, and then writing with the alphabets, and then reading with phonetic objects, box, phonetic reading cards. So I think you're noticing in this picture that I have digraphs included with the consonants and the alphabets. That's because we can teach them at 100% the same time. Many of us in our training, we learned that we should save digraphs for later, but it's completely unnecessary. We can teach them at the same time. That allows the movable alphabet to become an expressive work instead of a chore. And I could go on forever on this. Like, this is really, really cute. You see transformations happen in classrooms when you take this approach. When you have both the digraphs and the alphabets and the consonants together, the children can phonetically spell any word they want to spell. And phonetic spelling is developmental. We like it. It's good. Okay. All right. I'll get off my tangent there. All right. So that's phonics. The bottom line is we have to train the brain to read and recognize letters. The best way to do it is through systematic, multisensory methods that are tied with student interests. So again, when you're doing the movable alphabet work, they're expressing their ideas, their thoughts, and their beliefs. Is this making sense to everybody on phonics? Anybody have any thoughts or questions on this? Is everybody doing the green digraphs at the same time that the pink and blue in their school, do you think? Is no one? Anybody? Some people are, yeah, at the same time. And some people are doing them later. Probably it's a mix of both. Yeah, I'm just saying, move it earlier. Trust me. Fantastic. So how do we support this in the classroom? We're connecting sounds and symbols with the sandpaper letters. And if you're taking students who are starting when they're 5 or older, they're probably a lot less interested in tracing those sandpaper letters. You can use things like letter sound charts to help those students who really couldn't care about tracing the letters anymore. So they're going to do a different approach to be effective with them. Do a lot of letter sound games, like knock-knock games with the sandpaper letters, or those letter sound charts where the kids are playing together. Anything to make it interesting and inviting. And then doing a lot of encoding work with the alphabets. Again, starting with both the pink, blue, and green alphabets side by side, so the children can immediately express anything they want. They can make lists of their favorite foods, like if you have ice cream, strawberries, and bananas, or they can tell you what they saw on the way to school this morning. I saw a hawk being chased by 3 little birds. They can express their own thoughts. And this is what writing is all about. This is the magic of the alphabet. We also do handwriting activities, which I'm not going to get into too much here, but working with geometric cabinet, botany cabinet, metal insets, movable alphabets, and chalkboards. Okay, phonics development specifically, once we've done all that work in coding with letter sound knowledge, we get into the phonetic object box, phonetic 3-part cards, phonetic activity cards, phonetic reading cards. There's so many things. Love to play phonetic charades, which is really the whole body embodying. And you've got comprehension combined in there, because they have to stomp, they have to flap, right? They have to sip, they have to lift, they have to blink, right? And get their friends to figure out what they're doing. Really fun games. And then for phonograms, same thing for the digraphs, right? Adding in those lists and those 3-part cards that isolate the phonogram. And then getting more advanced into spelling variations with like the Dwyer spelling folders, doing spelling explorations with the alphabets, and learning puzzle words, right? The sight words. And just so you know, the puzzle words, I know we say we have to just memorize those, but it's actually, we're using the phonetic clues in those to help with the memorization. We don't usually memorize words just on their own. There's other clues within them. And that goes the same for symbolic languages like Chinese. Okay. Questions on phonics. Do you feel like, are most of your students getting to phonetic reading by the end of primary so that they start elementary phonetically reading? Or are your elementary teachers complaining that the kids can't read when they come in? Anybody want to answer that?
Ours are almost all reading.
They're almost all reading phonetically.
Yeah, and sight words and like the digraphs.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's pretty much what the elementary teachers are looking for, right? They want that baseline phonetic reading so that the kids will be able to move ahead upstairs. And that's what everybody's going for. So hooray, good for you. It's working. All right, so now we're going to move on to fluency and comprehension. And I've got these two kind of happening together because they pretty much happen together. Fluency is talking about accuracy, automaticity, like it's effortless to read. It's the rate, it's the appropriate speed that you're reading it, and your expression is typical. And we know this when we hear young readers read, sometimes they'll have this monotone when they're reading, there's not a lot of expression in it. And they're really sounding words out. They haven't just got it effortlessly yet. Okay, and that's typical part of development, and that smooths out as we get more comprehension going. And comprehension means we're making meaning from the written word. It makes sense to us. We also, as part of comprehension, we need this metacognitive awareness. Like we're paying attention to what we're studying or learning. And if we're interested in what we're learning, it's a lot easier to pay attention to it. So that's why student interest is always so key with what we're teaching in literacy, because we have to notice. Anybody read at bed before they're going to bed? I'm a nighttime reader. Anybody else a nighttime reader? Got a couple hands? Okay. So sometimes I find that I'm falling asleep, and I missed like a couple pages, right? And then I'm like, oh, I wake up and I'm like, I gotta back up, and you notice that you missed something. That's metacognitive awareness. And that's something we want students to develop so that independently we can say, wait a minute, I didn't get that at all. I got to go back and do it again, so we can self-regulate ourselves in what we're learning. So that's a part of comprehension, that ability to recognize when we understand something and when we don't, that we can go back and get more supports. And interest, again, is the driving factor between these. When we're really interested in something, we can persist and we'll go back and do it again and again because we want an answer, right? We want to figure something out. And so interest is the driving factor. So understanding who our students are, what they like, and kind of targeting our prompts and suggestions based on their interest is really critical for literacy development. So inspiration in particular accesses more brain real estate. And there's this wonderful research by Mary Helen Immordino-Yang that told stories, these really powerful stories of people doing amazing things to in their lives. And then they looked at the brains of people hearing these stories, and the brains like lit up. There was so much activity in the brain when people were inspired by the stories they heard. So think about that if you're talking with someone who has a gap, and most of us have a gap, right? We got little gaps all over the place. When we're inspired, the brain is empowered to kind of get around, have workarounds for any gaps that we have, just because we have more real estate available to work with, right? More available. So inspiration is hugely important in supporting young learners and adult learners. So if you've got your teaching staff and you're like, oh my gosh, I really need to move these guys along, inspiration is a great way to help get them there. Inspiring stories about students or something. I'll tell you one at the end. Now, I want to tell you about cognitive load, because sometimes we get so excited, we really overload people with what we hope will happen, and we get too much at once. It's like when you set those New Year's resolutions and they don't last because you're like, I can't do it, it's too much, right? Okay, that's because of how the brain develops. So look at this brain on the left. This is an 11-year-old brain right here. Those are the parts of the brain, the maroon and gold areas, that are active when that 11-year-old is reading. Now, I'm going to show you the picture of a 38-year-old brain. And before I do, just think to yourself, what is that brain going to look like? Is it going to be same places, more activity, less activity? This is what we use to read when we're 38. When we're experts at something, we hardly use any of the same resources. We need so much less to do something when we're an expert at it. So think about this with our students who are just learning. We think of 11-year-olds as pretty good readers, but look at how much brain effort it takes for them to read compared to us. And this is why isolating the stimuli is so important. One thing at a time, so that we don't overload already very busy brain. Does that make sense to everybody? Everybody's good with the cognitive load thing? That's a huge thing. We overload ourselves and others all the time, and it's tricky. So the bottom line for fluency and comprehension is that we need to find the student's interest and inspire them to let their voice be heard. and that will drive repetition and refinement. And that is what's going to lead to fluency and comprehension, because anything the brain does repeatedly, it gets more efficient at. And we're more likely to do things repeatedly that we enjoy. The brain finds it rewarding when it can really pay attention and get lost in a topic. The brain finds that very rewarding, and it helps with. So how do we support fluency and comprehension in the classroom? We do reading classification games. We label the body. And this is my son ages ago. He was labeling his lip, right? And his wrist and his neck and his chin. And then making little books, classification books, using 3-part cards to help word level reading about something they're interested in, using them for sorting activities too, to really develop areas of interest like zoology. We support it with word study, card games, solid color alphabet games with word study, a function of words activities. So many ways to help get deeper into morphology or the way words are put together and how they work together. And it's fun and interesting to do these games. And then we do things like the definitions and stages, which I like to call build a book. Right here, our definitions and stages, where we put the definition, we match it with the picture to create the book, like that. And then we do reading analysis work as well, where we're really breaking apart sentences. Okay, so this is huge, right? We just did everything, the whole big picture curriculum. And I just want to say, if no matter what, no matter who you're working with, sometimes we get students who come to us and we're like, I can't handle a student. This is not going to work at our school, right? And I just want to say that the brain can overcome. So even though we may be discouraged and we have to understand our limits, this is possible for the brain to change at all ages, even for us when we're in the second, half of our lives, right? We can change. We just may need to make a little more effort. And this is an example of a child who at 4, they had to have this part of the brain removed. And that's the part of the brain where those letter sound connections are usually made, the temporoparietal junction, occipital junction. And that's removed because this child was going to die, right? Okay. Everybody's like, this child will never read. They're going to lose that part of the brain. They'll never read. At age 11, this child read using the exact opposite side. She flipped hemispheres and read with the right side of her brain instead of the left. If we inspire our students, they will find a way to overcome. We don't always know how they're going to overcome, but it's inspiration and attention and interest that really drives that ability to learn and to overcome. So does that give you chills? I love that story. Love that story. All right, so now take a minute. We just covered an insane amount of material. I didn't give you hardly any chance to talk, which is bad on my part. And I want you to just write down for yourself 1 to 3 SMART goals that you'd like to do this week based on what we just covered about the science of reading. 1 to 3 SMART goals. Maybe, you want to greet kids with a tongue twister. Maybe you want to start singing in the halls. Maybe you want to take a minute to find out what a certain child's interested in, right? And try to make it a specific, measurable, like you'll know when you got it done, a specific action that you're going to do with it. Make it realistic and time bound. Say, all right, on Tuesday, I am going to talk to Keisha and find out what he really is interested in. Have a conversation with Keisha. Okay. So I'm going to pause for 1 minute so everybody can actually write that down. It's really important for memory consolidation, and it's better for the brain if you physically write it, but phone's okay, but it's better if you're using a pencil. Okay, I'll wait for 1 minute. I'm happy to share this slide with you, and I am recording this, so I'll post it on my YouTube channel. So if you want to watch it again, you can. Okay, just 10 seconds more. Okay, there's a lot of free resources on my website. We have a pedagogy blog. We have a lot of free downloads on the website that can help if you want to go deeper into any of this. And here are the references. I actually didn't make any of this up. And if you're a fan of research and you want to participate in research, please take out your phone and scan this QR code. It will bring you to a sign up page for the Montessori Research Pool, which is through, I'm a researcher associated with the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, who manages, actually University of Wisconsin River Falls manages the research pool. If you sign up, it just means researchers who have ethics board approval could reach out to you if they're doing a study that you match their criterion. And then you can choose yes or no to be in the study. Signing up does not mean you're in a study. It just means researchers could ask you if you want to be in the study. I used this for a mentoring research study that I did recently, and we've had over 1,800 people enrolled in this research pool, and it's been used by, I believe, 9 different researchers already. And we want more Montessori research. So I really encourage you to sign up for that. And that is it. So if anybody wants to talk or ask questions or anything, I would love to talk with you. What do you think? Was that bananas? Was that just like way too much in 45 minutes?
It was awesome.
Yeah. It was helpful? Oh. What do you think? Is this fitting? Go ahead. Who's got their hand raised?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I'm just interested in terms of the brain development. How did the child, I don't know if it's too complicated to speak about it, but how did the child go ahead at 11 years old and use the right side of the brain? Because that's not typically what would happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And how exactly it happened, we don't know. It's part of the mysteries. There's still so much that we don't know about the brain, but we know that it's possible. That we somehow inside, if we're really determined, we rewire ourselves. And in dyslexia, we actually see a right-sided wiring pattern instead of a left-sided pattern, which is in typically developing readers. So we know that it's possible for the brain to kind of do things differently, given different causes and conditions. Some of that is genetic, and some of it's environmental. So it's possible, and all we can do is keep encouraging and inspiring, and for reasons that we don't yet fully understand, the brain can adapt.
Yeah,
great question.
That would be so interesting to figure it out, because like there's so many children that struggle with learning to read, and if there's an adaptation of a child that had their brain altered, there's children that are struggling to learn to read that have no alteration of the brain. But if there's other, you can take that same. So if you ever figure it out, let us know.
Maybe you'll be the one to figure it out. But what does help all readers, whether they're dyslexic, whether they're history of reading atypicalities, or typically developing, is following the steps that I laid out here. That helps all readers. And so we're talking about be systematic, like actually teach the letter and digraph sounds, right? Use the alphabet for interest-based expression, right? So it's really coming from the student. Find out what they like. Get to know them as a human. Lots of practice with music and sounds. All of those strategies really work for all students. They really do. So great question. Great question. Who else? Anyone else? Go ahead.
We have a staff member actually that has dyslexia. She shared that with us, and she also shares that she has facial blindness, so like it's difficult for her to recognize faces. And when you mentioned the neuronal recycling as it's related to reading and repurposing that part of the brain, I'm curious about the connection there, like what her experience of reading and understanding directions per se or what have you is like.
Well, it's a brilliant question, and what an astute observation. That it's true that we are recycling that part of the brain so that it can define or it can recognize letters and letter sounds. It's also true that literate adults recognize faces less well than illiterate adults. So there's a cost to the fact that we change this part of the brain. We're not quite as good at recognizing faces as people who never do that. They can recognize faces more accurately than we can. Now, it sounds like what you're talking about with your staff member is agnosia, which is a little different, but I'm not sure it's not connected to that area. Agnosia is sometimes seen in autism, some types of autism, where you look at a face, but you don't really see a face, like it's just not working right. And it could be that there's an insult in neuroscience, we call it an insult when there's like a little lesion or scar or, quirk in a part of the brain. We sometimes call it an insult. It could be that there's something tricky in that part of the brain that isn't working for her and that's related to dyslexia and the ability that she can't see the faces. Or it could be that they're actually separate issues. So it's a really good question, and you'd have to look at her brain, to see. But the thing is, we can always train the brain to improve, even when we're, past childhood, even when we're entering, later ages. We can always improve the brain through training. So whatever we do repeatedly, the brain will get more efficient at. If we're interested in doing it, we'll tend to do it a lot. And then it'll be easier for the brain to get better at it. So don't give up. Don't give up. Yeah.
Anybody? I just have an observation about myself. It takes me time to attach faces with names. After meeting them a few times, I can do it, but it takes me time to do that. But there are some people who just meet me the one time, and the next time they'll know exactly the right name. So what's this?
Yeah, so here's the clue. If you're at the conference, look at the name tag, because just like I gave you in that example, right, when we're hearing new sounds, especially if it's not a typical name, but even if it is a typical name, when we're hearing new sounds, we get reinforcement from seeing the written language because we're literate, right? So if we can see the name tag, so here's tricks that I do because I meet so many people, is you look at the name and you say the name, oh, Saloni, it's so nice to meet you. And then you're like, oh, can I see your name tag? Because then it actually helps you, because those name tags are always flipping over. So you just ask, could I see your name tag? Oh, you're at that school. And it helps you because you get the oral. So this is called multisensory training, all right? Multisensory. You're hearing it, you're seeing it too, and you're saying it, articulating it. So that will help strengthen your ability to recall it in the future. That's why name tags are helpful, right? Don't wear them down at your belly button. Wear them up high so somebody can actually cheat and see, They don't want to pretend they're not looking and they're looking.
That makes sense. Anyone?
Will you be sharing the slides?
I'm happy to share them, and I am recording this now, so I'll post this on the YouTube so you can watch it if it helps. Maybe with your staff, maybe it'd be helpful.
Will it be on your YouTube for Maitri Learning?
Yes, it'll be on thank you for asking. It'll be on the Maitri Learning YouTube channel, and I'll put a link. I can send you the link, Saloni, if you want to share it with the group.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's great to meet you all.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing this, Julia. It was wonderful.
Thank you.